Now, the education law doesn't allow me, and the education policies don't allow me to study my history, don't allow me to study Palestinian literature, and they oppressed any expression of my identity and of my history.
It is reported that the rial declined more than 50% against the dollar in a year's time. Thus, essentials like rice have more than doubled. Goods like milk and paper have increased 20%, and vegetables are reported to have increased 148%.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on 22 cable stations from Vermont to New York City, on the internet at thestruggle.org, our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. We begin with a story about a member of the Israeli parliament, a Palestinian member of the Knesset. Her name is Haneen Zoabi, and she is unflinching in support for the rights of her people. She was even on the Mavi Marmara when it was attacked by Israeli commandos. She talks in Dublin, Ireland, in this piece, narrated by Greg Manahan of iDirect Movies. Then to Iran. In May, the group Havaar, made up of Iranians and Iranian Americans, had a program at a college in New York City. Havaar is part of Iran's Green Movement against the regime ruling the country, but firmly opposing war and other help from the Western countries that want to put one of their stooges at the head of Iran. Bitta Mostafi speaks about the effects of Iran, of the sanctions that grow worse and worse every month. And then part of a film about Iran's green protest movement and the terrible acts the Iranian government took against it.
Today we talk to a truly unique woman. Haneen Zoabi is a Palestinian who is also an elected member of the Knesset in Israel. Far from being an obedient token Arab in the parliament, she seeks a true democracy that offers justice and equality for Israel's Palestinian citizens. She accuses Israel of being a racist and apartheid state and refutes Israel's claim to be the only democracy in the Middle East. Haneen Zoabi was on board the Mavi Marmara, the Freedom Flotilla ship that was attacked by Israeli special forces in 2010 that resulted in the deaths of 9 men, including a US citizen. For her participation in the Freedom Flotilla, she had parliamentary privileges removed, including being able to join in debates or voting on parliamentary committees. She received death threats and had criminal charges preferred against her, which were subsequently dropped. We join her now in a packed public meeting in Dublin City organised by the Ireland-Palestine Solidarity Campaign, where she addresses the question of Palestinian identity in the Jewish state.
Israel says it's a democracy. Well, let's check if you are a democracy. You controlled our education system. You tried to impose another identity upon us, a very strange identity. They call it Israeli Arabs. We don't know what the meaning of Israeli Arabs. But even today in the Irish Times, I said, I'm not an Israeli Arab. I am an Israeli Arab. I am a Palestinian. You must write Palestinian, citizen of Israel. But he wrote also the journalist Israeli Arab. It is a very strange expression. And we said, we were not a British Arab within the mandate. We didn't call ourselves British Arab. Nor Britain has called us British Arab. Why suddenly now we are an Israeli Arab? We are Palestinians. So we take our citizenship seriously, we take our nationality seriously. We struggle for a full equality with the Jewish citizens. We want a normal city. We struggle for a normal state, which means equality and freedom for all the citizens without any advantages and privileges being guaranteed by the state for the Jewish citizens on the expense of the Palestinian citizens. And we think by this we are making a huge historical compromise.
Okay, one thing that we hear people like yourself saying, particularly, and this is something that would irk a lot of Americans and the Israeli lobby in America, is the word apartheid. Is Israel apartheid? And if it is, how is it?
By apartheid, you mean giving a control for one ethnic or national group upon other ethnic and national group. This is what apartheid is. Then Israel, yes, is an apartheid state, because there is a group of laws which has been formulated the way they are formulated in order to give advantages for the Jewish citizens in terms of land, using the land, controlling the land, budgeting, national identity, the education law. All of this deny the Palestinian citizens their basic rights, deny the Palestinian citizens their identity. Even there is a Nakba law, Nakba, which means the Palestinian catastrophe. This Nakba law is punishing any institution which commemorates Nakba by freezing its budgets. Now, the education law doesn't allow me, and the education policies don't allow me to study my history, don't allow me to study Palestinian literature, and they oppressed any expression of my identity and of my history. Land confiscation, various laws regarding land, make sure that the state confiscate the land from the Palestinians and make use for the exclusively for the Jewish state by Jewish citizens by building, for example, 1,000 cities and villages, all of them for the Jewish citizens. We now live upon 3% just of our land. By the admission committee laws, I am forbid from living upon 60% of the land inside Israel. So it is classical apartheid law. I wonder what you would call a law which prevent specific ethnic or national part of the citizens from using 60% of the land or from using the sources of the state. If this is not apartheid, so I don't know what's apartheid about.
And then my final question then is the AIPAC and the promoters of Israel in the United States would use you as an example that you being a Palestinian, you're a member of the Knesset, therefore Israel is a democracy. Is Israel a democracy?
If democracy is the tyranny of the majority, then Israel is a democracy. But I don't think that this is what democracy is about. Democracy is equality between citizens, and Israel does not guarantee equality between the Palestinian citizens and the Jewish citizens. Israel is doing all what she can do in order to secure a Jewish majority. Israel trying to Judaize also the land, also the landscape, also even to rewrite the history and to rewrite the geography in order to say that there were no Palestinians in 1948 and that Israel did not expel 85% of the Palestinian people and that it was an empty land and that the Jewish come to an empty land without any indigenous people, without any people, and they just discover this empty land and they just use this empty land. Well, there were Palestinians upon this empty land, and the land was not apparently an empty land. So, by having more than 32 laws, which de jure discriminate against the Palestinians, not just de facto, but de jure discriminate against the Palestinians, by having Palestinians with 50%, more than 50% of the Palestinians under poverty line, not represented in governmental position and in public sector and in the private sector, underrepresented in the universities, underrepresented in the budgeting, not the state doesn't guarantee them the resources, whether land or even water or even budgeting or even the infrastructure, development of industrial areas, and in addition oppressed their identity, oppressed their national identity, and in addition persecuting them when they struggle for their right. So absolutely, this is racism. This is what in democratic theory they call it racism, not democracy. Now, when I struggle for democracy, when I struggle for equality, when I struggle for justice, when I struggle to live in a normal state, within a normal life with the Jewish citizens, the state described me as a strategic threat. So what's really threatening Israel is a democracy. Democracy, real democracy, is a strategic threat for Israel.
For some time, even before the latest rounds of sanctions, Iran has suffered from a high rate of unemployment, inflation, decreased wages, and working conditions. Some economists state that their shift away from a state-run economy to an economy with greater privatization has much to do with this crisis, which contributed to people's ire as many took to the streets in 2009. The Iranian government has downplayed the effects of sanctions, stating that Tehran has reached self-sufficiency in every sector hit by sanctions. Further, where there is criticism or reporting of the economic crisis in Iran, state-run media outlets simply do not mention the sanctions at all. According to the central bank in Iran in 2012, 22.5% of Iranian families were unemployed. Underemployment has been estimated at close to 35%, with inflation at over 20%. The Iran Labor Report received reports from activists that production facilities had been forced to lay off 30% of workers, and those still holding jobs suffer from severe wage decreases. In an attempt to stimulate the economy in the face of the harshest sanctions, the central bank devalued the international exchange rate of its currency, the rial, to increase exports, in essence, making Iranian products cheaper. However, this also had the effect of increasing the cost of imported goods, harming businesses large and small that rely on imported raw materials in their own production. It is reported that the rial declined more than 50% against the dollar in a year's time. Thus, essentials like rice have more than doubled. Goods like milk and paper have increased 20%, and vegetables are reported to have increased 148%. Reports from earlier this year state that Iran has had trouble paying for things like rice, cooking oil, grain, and other goods. Iranian farmers face a shortage of feed for their livestock. Though food shipments are not targeted under sanctions, financial measures have frozen Iranian firms out of much of the global banking system, hindering their ability to buy goods. A businesswoman in the city of Mashhad is quoted as saying, "I'm living day to day. I don't know if we will be able to keep our business or pay our rent in the months. But other people less fortunate than me are worried about feeding their children." Testimonies collected by women's rights activists in Tehran indicate that medicines for illness such as asthma, cancer, and other chronic diseases are either in short supply or completely unavailable or unaffordable. People with life-threatening illnesses such as cancer can no longer afford to pay for their injections, says one pharmacist, so they either delay them or mostly among poor communities, forego them altogether. Everyone who knows someone in Iran has one of these anecdotes. I have been told that based on various reports and shortages from families, they stocked up for fear of short supply, only later to learn that reports were misguided. The sanctions also target the oil and gas industry. 80% of the Iranian government's income comes from the energy sector. The depth and indiscriminate effect of these sanctions are beyond those even anticipated by the governments pushing for them. Just recently, it was reported that the UK said it was in talks with other EU members about possibly easing a provision of their oil embargo before it goes into effect. Essentially, there would be harmful and unintended side effects because it bans Europe-based insurers from covering any ships that carry Iranian oil anywhere in the world. Recently, Secretary of State Clinton failed in convincing India to decrease its consumption of Iranian oil. However, in order to avoid sanctions, both India and China have sought alternative methods of paying Iran for the oil and the delivery. Looking at numbers for people like me who are not economists is not always helpful. I know. It's hard to connect to the reality of what a food shortage looks like, or what it means to not have access to cancer drugs that you need. These are real consequences that Iranians are already facing. What never gets discussed behind the closed doors and back alley negotiations of politicians is what effect these threats have on the overall health of a people. a population of 79 million Iranians, are the primary targets, not those in power, of unethical and immoral policies that are intended to drive them to misery so as to change the conduct of the government that many believe does not represent them. Gallup compared a poll from this year and last in which they asked Iranians what their mood was. The number of those that said they were worried much of the day prior shot up to 55% from 38% the year prior. I was lucky enough to spend 2 months in Iraq before the invasion of 2003. In the hotel where we stayed in Baghdad, there was an ever demure, older, kind gentleman who was an Iraqi ballet dancer before the Gulf War, where he was wounded and could no longer dance. His job was to prepare us and serve tea. Every day, he would come into the dining hall, and he would ask us, "Will there be war today?" The trauma of what constant threat and anxiety that increased sanctions and belligerent threats of war have on people should not be taken lightly. Similarly, we cannot hang back and let the sanctions take their toll on the country over the next 10 years, as many of its advocates would have us do. We have to learn from our mistakes. A minority of people continued the hard work of protesting the sanctions in the aftermath of the first Gulf War. It was not until real threats of a second war arose that many began to learn about and advocate against those policies. But at that point, the war was the solution to lifting the sanctions, the final endgame the United States had ultimately set up.
زمان جنگ زمان تک صدای ژنرال هایی که برای هم رجز میخونن، برای همین هر صدای اعتراض یا انتقاد محکوم به خاموشیه. من با جنگ مخالفم چون شنیدن صدای زنها و مردهایی که برای برابری و آزادی تلاش میکنن به مراتب از شنیدن صدای جنگ افزارها زیباتر.
سایه جنگ سالهاست ما رو ترک نمیکنه. صحبت‌های روزمره کوچه و خیابون‌های شهر من پر از واژه‌های بی‌معنی. تحریم‌ها، پیش‌لرزه‌های جنگ، فشارهایی که پشت زنان و مردان رو خم کرده. مادر اخبارگوی رشد روزانه قیمت‌ها شده. من با جنگ مخالفم، چرا که صداش برای من صدای زنیه که از ناتوانی برای سیر کردن شکم فرزندانش میگه. من با جنگ مخالفم، چرا که تصویرش برای من فقر، آوارگی، ویرانیه.
من با جنگ مخالفم چون باور کردم جهان دیگه ممکنه، چون یاد گرفتم برای تغییر این جهان کاری کنم. هنوز دستمون به هیچ گوشه این جهان بهتر بند نشده. تانک‌ها آرزوی جهان بهتر هم رو نمی‌کنن. من با جنگ مخالفم چون جهان بهتر نمیتونه روی گوشه سوخته بره.
What's really Israel's game on Iran? Netanyahu and Barak seem to want to bomb Iran immediately. Their threats grow by the day. But maybe they are just using these threats to scare the Obama administration. An Israeli attack might upset the Obama election apple cart, blackmailing him into giving Israel more money, more weapons, and new sanctions against Iran. Sanctions that could rival the horrors that were once levied against Iraq. Now, Mac calls upon the people of the U.S. to protest, but one activist says it's all pretty useless, that Israel and the U.S. will keep beating up on the world until they run into a wall and bring catastrophe upon their own nations. Well, Iran might be that barrier. Unlike weak Iraq, Iran is much stronger, much bigger. It lost 1 million people in its defensive war in the 80s. It only stopped fighting when it became clear that the U.S. was pretty much on the side of Saddam Hussein. Iranian missiles could close the Strait of Hormuz. And wouldn't that be a merry state of things, with 1/5 of the world's oil blocked down tight? Finally, a salute to the people of Ecuador, whose president has decided to give Julian Assange, the publisher of WikiLeaks, political asylum to keep him out of the dungeons of the USA. No doubt the U.S. and its sidekick Britain will be putting Ecuador through all kinds of hell. In closing, an invite to come to New Haven on Saturday, September 15th, to mark the 30th anniversary of the Sabra Shatila massacre, with an afternoon program at the library and a following protest march. More at our website, thestruggle.org. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.